The world of Claymore is filled with monsters lurking everywhere, from forests and abandoned caves to even your own home. There's no telling when and where these infernal creatures called the Yoma will strike from. They could very well be right next to you right now, in the guise of one of your family members, waiting for you to close your eyes so that they can grant you the embrace of eternal slumber. That alone makes them nigh undetectable to an ordinary person, but adding to their insidious nature is the fact that they possess superhuman attributes capable of overpowering more than a dozen of the strongest men at the same time. While this is indeed a black world to call home, there are those who have been tasked with keeping these monsters at bay. A band of mysterious, powerful, and beautiful female warriors, whom the common folk have given the name Claymores after their preferred weapon of choice, the greatsword that they wield. You would think that these warriors would be heralded as saviors and heroes, but instead, they're feared and reviled by the ignorant masses of this world. It is human nature to fear that which we can't comprehend, hence, their presence is only tolerated so long as they make themselves scarce and perform their often thankless job. This is because, despite retaining their humanity, Claymores are hybrids, half Yoma and half human. The harrowing surgery and procedure through which they are created by embedding the flesh and blood of a Yoma into the bodies of young prepubescent girls is kept a secret from the masses. This procedure, along with granting them their hybrid status, also alters them physically. The procedure results in a rapid deterioration of pigments, resulting in a pale skin tone, hair that varies in shades of blonde, and silver eyes. These only serve to further alienate them from the people they protect. They're endowed with strength and superpowers that make them capable of taking on ordinary Yoma quite easily. There are, however, certain monsters that even these super-powered warriors find difficult to deal with. The Yoma are actually at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to the monster hierarchy. When one of these warriors finally reaches their limit, either through battle or due to the passage of time, they run the risk of their Yoma side taking over. This process is called the awakening, and the resulting creature is known as an awakened being. This monster is at least 10 times stronger than the average Yoma. Their power level is tied to the prowess they possessed while they were still warriors. Only the strongest warriors are capable of defeating these awakened beings, with most Claymores otherwise having to form parties to take them on. The character that we're going to talk about in this video today, however, transcends even these uber-powerful awakened beings. If the strength of an awakened being depends on her power level as a warrior, we'd like you to think about what happens when the rank 1 warrior, who is the strongest among all Claymores, ends up awakening. Such an event is categorized as a calamity, with the organization almost being destroyed completely when a former number 1 awakened near their base of operations. The creature that is birthed from the awakening of the former number 1 warriors far surpasses even the awakened beings and are thusly called the Abyssal ones due to the nigh limitless power that they hold. Not even rank 1 warriors can take them on, and facing an abyssal being, even with a large party, is considered suicide. Hence, they are left alone. Today, we're going to be talking about Riful, the second abyssal being to awaken in Claymore, and arguably the strongest of her kind. We'll be doing our usual deep dive into her character and covering everything from her origins to her powers, appearance, and motivations. So let's dive right into this dark fantasy world created by mangaka Norihiro Yagi and hope that we survive this encounter with the first and youngest female warrior to reach rank 1 status, the one they call the Empress of the West, Riful. What is the origin of Riful as a warrior and as an abyssal one? Riful was the first female warrior inducted by the organization, even as the male warriors of the first generation were slowly being phased out. We see her appear before Isley, Rigardo, and Dauf, all of whom are initially surprised by her presence before the organization's plans for its male warriors dawns on them. The Claymores were originally an all-male club, but due to these warriors being unstable, leading them to awaken prematurely, they were branded as defective products and replaced by female warriors. Since women seemed resistant toward the temptations of awakening, soon the males would be phased out. As we're not introduced to any other female warriors from that early time, we can assume that Riful was the first female Claymore, and we also know that she was essentially the strongest and youngest warrior to hold the number 1 rank within the organization. As a warrior, she is said to have been extremely powerful and reached her potential faster than anyone in the organization's history. By the very fact that she turned into an abyssal one instead of a mere awakened being, we can safely assume that she was highly overpowered even as a warrior. With her awakening, she would follow in Isley's footsteps and become the second abyssal being to come into existence after him. This would greatly shift the power balance, and the island that had been largely split between Isley and the organization would be further divided, with Riful taking up the western half as her domain. This would push Isley to the north, the organization to the east, and Riful Riful to the west, the south being a disputed territory until the emergence of Luciella, but that's a story for another time. We're first introduced to Riful and her consort, Dauf, when a group of Claymores goes missing after being kidnapped by the target they were supposed to be hunting. Considering that Abyssal beings are the most dominant creatures in Claymore, with even the top-ranked warriors having very slim chances of victory against them, we don't understand how these warriors were sent to kill Riful. With the organization's informants usually being extremely reliable, this had to have been a massive error or an intentional ploy by the organization, just like the incident that would take place in the town of Pieta in the north much later. Regardless, this is where we first get introduced to Riful and Dauf, who are torturing the Claymores they've captured into awakening. They're doing this in order to create their own army of awakened beings so as to compete against Isli and Luciella for their respective territories. After Dauf is defeated by the combined might of Galatea, Jean, and Claire, she steps in to stop the fight. However, before she can capture them, the three manage to escape her grasp. From then on, Riful continues to pop in and out of the story and plays an important part even after her death. Her origins from before her emergence as a warrior are never revealed to us. We can, however, say that her story probably wasn't so different from many of the other recruits that preceded and followed her. She was most likely a victim in a Yoma attack that resulted in the death of everyone she loved and cared for. Since we're told that a Claymore's strength is equal to the hatred she feels towards the Yoma, her tragedy and trauma must have been great indeed for her to have become such a powerful warrior at such a young age, and an abyssal one who transcended even the awakened beings. What is Riful's personality and motivation? Norihiro Yagi designed Riful as an extremely layered character based on both her motivations and personality. During her warrior days, she's seen as having a cheery disposition and seems to be respectful and courteous, but the audience is given an eerie sense that she's concealing something far more sinister regarding her character. This is an aspect of her personality that she carries with her even as an abyssal being. Typically, when you awaken, not only are you physically altered forever, but also psychologically. While a semblance of their former self lurks deep within their subconscious, in Riful's case, it seems to have been carried over pretty much intact and in dominant fashion for her. While abyssal ones are far from mindless monsters, she masks her savagery behind an innocent smile. Riful is extremely cunning and calculating, and despite the air of playfulness and nonchalance that she puts on, she's hyper-aware of everything happening around her. Even while she's committing heinous acts of torture, she does so with an almost childlike innocence. It makes her seem even more psychotic because it's almost like watching a cat toy with its food. Her prey knows that their demise is inevitable and that it'll only be a matter of time before Riful gets bored. Initially, her motivation seems to be to overthrow Isli by creating her own army of awakened beings. This motivation changes over the course of the series as different events play out. Being one of the three strongest creatures in existence, she's used to having her way, and it shows later on when she's being outmatched by Priscilla. Since they're mostly left to themselves, there is very little information about the Abyssal ones. Having awakened and left their humanity behind, they're thought to be incapable of expressing and experiencing human emotions such as love and compassion. This is true for the most part, and while Riful does display a callous regard for the lives of other creatures, including awakened beings, it's quite clear that she has romantic inclinations towards Dauf. The rude and rough manner in which she treats him is just another example of her masked self. Later, we see Isli create a familial bond with Raki and Priscilla, but it is Riful and Dauf who show us that the Abyssal ones are still capable of human emotions first. We initially see Riful dropping her mask when she encounters Priscilla for the first time. Isli finally makes his move against Luciella, the Abyssal being of the south, to fulfill Priscilla's request to find her parents and expand his own territory. Riful shows us that she's also an opportunist by choosing to attack Isli, knowing that the Emperor of the North would be severely weakened after his fight with Luciella, making him ripe for the picking. However, Riful is forced to retreat when she senses Priscilla's power levels and realizes that Isli's companion's powers far exceed her own. This is when Riful drops her nonchalant and frivolous act and expresses genuine anger and disdain at having been outwitted and overpowered by Isli and Priscilla. The fact that she actually acknowledges somebody else's superiority and backs off shows that despite often presenting herself as an overconfident, egocentric individual, she's pragmatic enough to assess the situation and act accordingly. This is further proven when she shifts her focus from creating an awakened army, deeming it to be futile against Priscilla, to awakening the fused body and essence of Luciella and Rafaela. Her cunning is on full display because she realizes the desperation of her situation due to the massive disparity in power between Priscilla and everyone else, including her. So, by awakening the fused essence of Luciella, who already held the power of an Abyssal one, along with her sister Rafaela, who herself was rumored to have enough power to awaken as another Abyssal being, she hopes to create a monster at the same level as Priscilla. During her final hour, despite having shown little to no regard for anyone other than Dauf and shown cold disregard for the lives of everybody else, one almost feels sorry for her. By the second half of the show, her motivation has drastically shifted towards killing Priscilla. Such is the depth of her conviction that even after her death, she gives rise to being capable of going toe-to-toe with Priscilla and almost manages to defeat her. We'll be discussing this version of her later in the video, so stay tuned to find out more about that. But to sum it up, Riful is an extremely powerful and cunning individual who's fully aware of her strength. She's capable of extreme pragmatism and planning, despite appearing to be almost childlike and innocent. On top of that, this childlike quality of hers only serves to mask and accentuate her viciousness. Her sole motivation is to rule over everything with no equal, and to that end, she initially tries to kill Isli, and then later turns her ire towards Priscilla, knowing that while these two existed, there was no way she could achieve her goal. She shows a certain amount of ruthlessness and a lack of honor when she attempts to ambush Isli after his fight with Luciella. Furthermore, she's also willing to risk the awakening of Luciella and Rafaela, despite not knowing what impact the creature would have as long as Priscilla was destroyed. I think you can see why we said that she is one of the most layered characters in the series. She doesn't get the same amount of time in the sun as many other characters, but her personality and motivations are layered like a cake in the few incidents that she is involved in. What does Riful look like? Riful is the first female warrior to appear with the features of a Claymore in the organization's history. She has the same iconic platinum blonde hair, pale vampire-like skin, and eyes with silver irises that generations of female warriors after her would inherit. Her armor seems to be the standard for warriors of the first generation. Riful's body is covered with a white skin-tight outfit with some sparse armor on top. On her shoulders is a pair of triple-layered spalders, and instead of the typical sword carrier that also doubles as protection for the upper back used by the later female warriors, there's a simple hook system to hold her Claymore. She wears a pair of vam braces on her arms with a simple fold to protect the hip area. Her feet and shin are protected by sollarettes and sabatons made out of the plate. You'd imagine for monster hunters she'd be much more heavily armored, but a Claymore armor is designed in a way to give her maximum protection without hindering her superhuman speed and agility. Just like in the case of the first generation warriors, there are emblems on her outfit. Her look is completed by her giant Claymore. After awakening, Riful recovers certain features of her appearance that she had before her surgery that turned her into a Claymore. She loses the platinum blonde hair and silver eyes for her original brown hair and chestnut eyes. Her skin, though, still seems to have that pale tone to it. Also, the permanent scars that all Claymores have after their surgery seem to have healed and completely disappeared. While in her human form, Riful looks like a young girl about the same age as when she first appeared before Dauf, Isli, and Rigardo on that fateful day. Knowing that Claymores don't age after a certain point, this isn't really a surprise. Her body, while appearing to be made of a solid piece like most creatures, is actually numerous biomechanical ribbon-like appendages. When unleashing her true power, her body slowly sheds its human look and begins expanding until she's taller than trees. In this form, her ribbons coalesce to form a humanoid shape that vaguely resembles her. Her vital parts are completely shielded by these ribbons, and she has no legs. Instead, her lower half is propped up by her appendages by taking different shapes. What are Riful's powers and attributes? Immense Yoki reserves. Touted as the youngest warrior to have reached her full potential and inherited the rank of #1 warrior from Isli, Riful's power as a Claymore cannot be doubted. While the ability to control one's Yoki is of the utmost importance, what's more vital in determining someone's power level is their raw Yoki reserves. This energy that runs through all Yoma, awakened beings, and Claymores is the reason behind their superhuman abilities and powers. #1 rank soldiers are usually considered the strongest of their own generation because they outclass their compatriots immensely in terms of Yoki reserves, which allows them to perform feats and take on foes that others cannot. It's not unusual for prodigies to appear in the world of Claymore, as we've seen in the case of Miata and Priscilla, both of whom were expected to one day become rank 1 warriors. It is therefore not surprising that despite her age, Riful would possess enough Yoki to become the top warrior of the organization. If this wasn't proof enough, surely the fact that upon awakening, instead of just transforming into an ordinary awakened being, she ascends into an Abyssal one is. As an Abyssal being, her Yoki reserves are near infinite, even though some speculate she might have been weaker or at the same level as Isli, who himself gets insanely powerful. The fact that she was able to birthed the creature known to us as the Riful-like being goes to show she might have had the edge after all. Due to her immense power, she is hardly tested in battle throughout the series. Only towards the end, when she gets attacked by the Abyss Feeders Alicia and Beth, along with Priscilla, within a short span of time, do we really see her being pushed to her limits. After the time skip, when we see her facing the new rank 3 and 5 warriors, Audrey and Rachel, for a time it seems like she is being overpowered, but it all turns out to be a ruse and Riful easily defeats them. In an organization, the single-digit warriors are no slouches, and these two were in the top 5 and still couldn't hold a candle against Riful. The Empress of the West shows that her title is not merely ornamental, and there is a reason she was left to rule her territory by everyone, including her 2 fellow abyssal beings and the organization that created her over centuries. Immense durability. While there are very few beings that exist within the world of Claymore that can damage an abyssal one, they're not truly invulnerable. For the longest time, Riful, along with the 2 other original abyssal beings, ruled as the strongest creatures in the real world. The only people that could harm them were each other. So we're not exactly wrong to say that her body was nigh invulnerable, because other than those 2, who kept to themselves, there really wasn't anyone else whose attacks could harm her for most of the series. Also, the fact that her body was entirely composed of ribbon-like appendages whose size she could alter meant that all slashing and thrusting attacks were rendered useless against her. This is because she could just split her body at the point where the weapon made contact, making the weapon slide right through her. This was an almost broken ability, as she was already on top of the totem pole of powerful creatures, and there were no enemies powerful enough to bypass this ability. It's only when Priscilla is able to completely overpower her due to the immense gap in their strength and destroy her from within that Riful seemingly dies. Outside of Priscilla, the only people who could possibly kill her are Teresa and the Destroyer. We can honestly say that Priscilla only manages to kill her purely because of their gap in strength, and it wouldn't have been possible for anyone else below her power level, because when Riful emerges as the Riful-like being, she absolutely demolishes Priscilla for most of their fight. Out of all the abyssal ones, we can say that she has one of the most durable bodies, bar Priscilla, with her insane regeneration. Weaponized extendable appendages. As we mentioned earlier, her body is made out of biomechanical ribbon-like appendages. While these things constitute her body, she is able to use them as weapons as well. Riful is able to fully manipulate every one of her ribbons independently. They can essentially function as multiple arms with which she can bind her opponents, toss them about, and even tear them apart. They are also shown to be sharp enough to slash and impale her enemies. On multiple occasions, Riful prefers to impale her prey to immobilize them instead of binding, a display of her vicious nature. Enhanced Yoki reading. Riful's Yoki sensing technique is not limited to merely pinpointing the location of other creatures based on their energy signature, and it's a far more accurate technique. While not at the same level as Teresa's ability to sense the flow of Yoki, Riful is also proficient enough to easily decipher the techniques of her opponent by reading the Yoki flow within their bodies. We first see this when she tells Dauf about Galati's Yoki manipulation technique, which causes him to miss all his attacks on her. She does so by merely observing the conflict between her consort and the female warrior. While initially, this can be dismissed as mere extraordinary observational skills, her insane Yoki reading abilities are all but confirmed a bit later in the same fight. Her Yoki reading technique is confirmed when she's also able to accurately analyze the secret behind Claire's quicksword technique. Riful figures out that in order for Claire to have such a powerful sword technique, she was awakening only her arm to generate enough power to utilize it. Riful is also able to detect that Claire's awakened arm is not really her own by reading the Yoki signature of the arm given to her by Irene or Eilina in the anime. Later on, when she's being hunted by the organization's new number 1 and 2 rank warriors, Alicia and Beth, Riful is once again able to discern the nature of their power. For the sake of context, Alicia and Beth were the results of the organization experimenting with twins to create their own abyssal beings, ones that they could control as deterrence for the other abyssal beings. Thanks to a technique called the Soul Link, Beth is able to take on her sister's consciousness within herself, allowing Alicia to awaken safely without losing her humanity. This also allows Alicia to revert back to her human form. Towards the end of the season, during their clash, after sensing the twins' Soul Link technique despite encountering it for the first time, she sends Dauf to attack Beth in order to gain an edge in the battle. However, their fight is eventually interrupted by Priscilla. We don't know if this is an ability that she possessed as a warrior or some something that she gained after awakening. If she had this ability during her Claymore days, it probably would have been one of the reasons for her meteoric rise as the youngest and first female #1 rank warrior in history. Master Swordswoman! We're not shown what sort of sword technique Riful possessed as a warrior, but looking at all the #1 rank warriors that we've seen in the series so far, we know that she must have been formidable with her Claymore. It's almost a prerequisite for every #1 rank warrior to have some insanely powerful sword technique, or maybe even two. Although we aren't shown what exactly her technique was, we can imagine that with all the powers and attributes that we just discussed, her style would be greatly enhanced by it. We can therefore say with confidence that Riful was a master swordsman. It would have been interesting to pit her against some of the best swordsmasters that we know in the series, like Teresa, Roxanne, Cassandra, and Hysteria. Sadly, that doesn't seem to be a possibility outside of fan theories. Riful-like being. Since this is a video about Riful, it would be wrong not to mention the creature, which is generally called the Riful-like being, as the author doesn't give it a name in the series. After Riful's death at the hands of Priscilla, we see a creature arise with power levels on par with Priscilla's own. After absorbing the remains of the destroyer, this unnamed creature, which greatly resembles Riful's appearance, would begin clashing with the story's antagonist. The creature looks exactly like Riful in her human form, but has the powers of both the Abyssal of the West and her consort Dao. She's able to fully manipulate the ribbon-like appendages, just like Riful, for both offense and defense. It is to be noted that this ability seems to have gotten much stronger than it was originally, as Priscilla isn't able to break through it as she did earlier. This ability is further augmented by Dauf's raw generation technique, which the Riful-like being is able to use as projectiles. She is in fact so strong that Priscilla's regeneration, which was likened to the power of creation, is unable to keep up with the damage being put out by this Riful-like being. After Teresa of the Faint Smile, she's the only one to have pushed Priscilla to that degree. For almost the entire series, despite having exceptional speed and reflexes, Priscilla is seen tanking all the damage thrown at her because no one really has the power to damage her sufficiently. She just plows through everything that's being thrown at her and completely overpowers her with sheer brute force. The Riful-like being is the first one to make Priscilla actually change her tactics and fight seriously. Other than its immense power levels, which are assumed to be on par with Priscilla, the Riful-like being has an additional ability that counters Priscilla's boundless strength. The Riful-like being is able to steal the yoki of any opponent that comes into contact with her physical form. This means anybody who fights her without an external weapon becomes weaker, while she becomes stronger as the fight wears on. This is how she's able to easily overpower Priscilla. Realizing that the Riful-like being could not be defeated by her usual fighting style, Priscilla transforms into her human form and uses her Claymore to finally defeat her. While some speculate that she's actually the child of Riful and Dauf, that theory is really far-fetched, considering what we know about the Abyssal beings already, and is generally dismissed by the Claymore community. The creature doesn't have any high level of intelligence and seems to be driven by a singular emotion of hatred directed towards destroying Priscilla. Through her, Riful continues to influence the story even beyond the grave. One of the biggest differences between Riful's awakened form and this is that when Riful unleashes her full power, she fully transforms into her biomechanical ribbon form, whereas the Riful-like being still retains her humanoid appearance and only transforms her legs and arms. While we can make an entire video about this being, you know we cannot ignore this version of Riful if we're making any sort of video about her. Marvelous verdict! Dark fantasy is one of the most popular genres out there, transcending all known mediums from books to movies. It is therefore no surprise that anime and manga haven't been able to escape its touch as well. There are many types of characters that inhabit the stories set in this subgenre of fantasy, from the downright psychotic to the enigmatic. Riful treads a fine line between both of these archetypes. We know that she's a monster that holds no remorse while taking the lives of others, but the fact that this bloody side of hers is juxtaposed with another side of her character that would normally be considered innocent and childlike makes her even more macabre and scary. Despite being a side character, she really enhances Claymore's claim as one of the best in the dark fantasy genre. Written and drawn by acclaimed mangaka Norihiro Yagi, the man behind the award-winning one-shot manga Undead Man, Claymore was first published in the monthly Shonen Jump magazine on June 6, 2007. After the magazine was shut down, it would resume publication in the new Jump Square magazine until its end on October 4, 2014. The series had a publication history that spanned 13 years. An anime adaptation would soon follow under the famous Madhouse Studios, which would take the first 11 volumes of the manga and animate them over 24 episodes. The ending of the anime would prove to be slightly underwhelming, however, as it took a massive diversion from the manga's true ending. Despite that, the anime was well received and increased the popularity of the series. If we've managed to pique your interest in this legendary manga and anime, we highly recommend you check it out. It's an anime catered towards a more mature audience as it features gore, violence, nudity, and complex profound themes such as humanity, love, betrayal, existential crises, and more. Well, we've come to the end of our video. There's plenty more Claymore content to be found on our channel. If you like this video and are a fan of Claymore in general, we encourage you to go check out those videos as well. We do regular character breakdowns along with lore and theory crafting. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end of this video. Your presence is what makes it possible for us to make these stories, and we couldn't do it without you. Also, we want to know your thoughts about Riful. Do you think she's the strongest out of all the Abyssal beings, including the ones that show up later in the series? Give us your opinions in the comments section down below. Until next time, this is Wizard Wheezy signing off. Stay safe, and we'll see you in our next video. Peace!